John Hagelin, Ph.D., is a world-renowned quantum physicist, leading science and public policy expert, and international director of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. Dr. Hagelin has conducted pioneering research at CERN, the European Center for Particle Physics, and SLAC, the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, and is responsible for the development of a highly successful grand unified field theory based on the superstring. His scientific contributions in the fields of electroweak unification, grand unification, supersymmetry, and cosmology include some of the most cited references in the physical sciences. In addition, Dr. Hagelin has spent much of the past quarter century leading a scientific investigation into the foundations of human consciousness. In his book, Manual for Perfect Government, Dr. Hagelin shows how, through educational programs that develop human consciousness, it is possible to overcome acute social problems and to enhance governmental effectiveness. Dr. Hagelin received his Ph.D. from Harvard University in 1981. He is currently director of the Institute of Science, Technology, and Public Policy and professor of physics at Maharishi University of Management, Minister of Science and Technology of the global country of world peace, and President of the U.S. Peace Government. Dr. Hagelin is now establishing a University of World Peace in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, and welcome to the first International Conference of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. I'm John Hagelin, the International Director of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, and we are broadcasting this conference today live from the Sheraton Moria Hotel in New Delhi via internet webcast and also via telephone conference. For those connected via telephone, you should be receiving shortly a video DVD of this conference proceedings and will therefore have a better opportunity to view the scientific graphics relevant to this discussion. I'm welcoming today scientists from around the world who are taking a leading role in the Global Union of Scientists for Peace and participating in this first international conference. Welcoming leading scientists from the United States and from Canada, Mexico, India, Japan, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, Brazil, South Africa, Moldova, Montenegro, Ghana, and the possibility of others connecting at the last moment. We are going to proceed quickly in this brief international conference to cover a range of very important topics relevant to the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. A brief outline of what we need to cover in a short period will be, first, a quick introduction. What is the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, for those who are new to this global organization? Second, a quick discussion of the important need for the Global Union of Scientists for Peace to emerge in the world at this time. Three, and primarily, we're going to be discussing important breakthroughs in the field of peace and the field of conflict resolution, focusing today on this concept and methodology known as preventative defense. That is, diffusing regional tensions and thereby preventing the outbreak of violence and war through proven scientific methods. And finally, a few organizational points, including financial support for our Global Union activities in different countries throughout the world. First, a quick introduction to what is the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. Global Union of Scientists for Peace is a very powerful global network of preeminent scientists dedicated to the cause of peace and the cause of nuclear disarmament in this precarious time. The purpose of this global union of top scientists throughout the world is to showcase breakthrough research in the field of peace and conflict prevention, and to dynamically support the implementation of practical programs that have demonstrated their ability to prevent violent conflict and to promote peace and national security on a scientific basis. We, the presidents of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace of many countries throughout the world, over 40 countries throughout the world, hold high positions of scientific authority in the fields of science and public policy, and collectively we can exert a very powerful influence on public policy and public opinion in the cause of peace. In addition, as a global organization, we have access to financial resources through remunerative peaceful projects. For example, large-scale organic agricultural production and global distribution of organic agricultural produce to bring revenues to support peace-promoting projects in different countries throughout the world. All of this, these positions of high prestige and influence in our countries, a global organization which gives us much greater power and reach, proven, powerful programs that are truly effective in preventing war and promoting peace, and financial basis for our peace-promoting projects, all of this gives us much more than mere academic importance. All of this translates into significant national and global influence. So that is the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. Why create this Global Union of Scientists for Peace? Well, I think the reason is pretty clear. For 50 years, since the founding of what is called Pugwash, scientists with a conscience have taken a united stand against nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and even against the institution of war. But despite our highly rational appeals to governments concerning, in particular, the grave threat to mankind and to our global ecosystems posed by nuclear weapons, nevertheless, nuclear proliferation continues to this very day. The politicians' ability, we have found through experience, to truly comprehend the dangers of nuclear war are limited by their own level of consciousness, are limited by their own level of cognitive development. In addition, those few politicians who are committed to the cause of preventing war and eliminating weapons of mass destruction, they are often restricted in their ability to act towards this extent by the collective consciousness of the citizens of their country. And the collective consciousness of many countries is really still driven by fear and narrow-minded nationalism, so that the people don't support peaceful initiatives even from their elected leaders. And we're seeing increasingly in the world today, due to fear, the citizens of many countries, through the democratic process, are electing leaders such as George Bush or such as Hamas in the recent Palestinian elections, electing leaders that are not themselves committed to the cause of peace. So clearly we need a more effective way to raise the collective consciousness of the citizens of a country to provide broad-based support for proven peaceful initiatives. So the Global Union of Scientists for Peace was founded in part to employ proven approaches to dynamically promote peace and to prevent the outbreak of war, including programs to actually raise the collective consciousness of a country and diffuse acute stress and tensions and fear and narrow-minded nationalism from the collective consciousness of a country to promote a peaceful and coherent national consciousness. We're going to be focusing for the next hour or so on important scientific content, recent breakthroughs in the field of peace and in the field of conflict prevention. These developments collectively are known as preventative defense. That means preventing the outbreak of war by neutralizing the tensions and enmity in a potential adversary, so countries don't rise in war against one another. We'll be explaining this in detail in the tremendous scientific, theoretical, and empirical support for this innovative but effective approach, beginning with a very, very sort of brief, almost crude introduction and overview to give some intuitive sense for the subject, followed by a more thorough scientific presentation of the theoretical foundations for this preventative approach to defense, followed by a discussion of the empirical evidence that powerfully supports the effectiveness and cost-effectiveness of this new approach, followed by practical steps of implementation, things that we could do, for example, as scientists in our countries to ensure the rapid implementation of these preventative means to defense, and by eventually preventing war and putting an end to the institution of war as an instrument of foreign policy, rendering weapons, especially weapons of mass destruction, a thing of the past, rendering them obsolete by preventing the very outbreak of war. Is this possible, practically speaking? And we will discuss now some scientific evidence that it is. very practical. So let us introduce, on a very simple level at first, the idea of prevention of war. It is well known that we are living today in an epidemic of stress. On the individual level, the level of human physiology, we see an alarming rise of stress-related illness, including stroke, heart disease, drug dependency and drug abuse, violent behavior. All of these are symptoms of acute individual stress. Similarly, on a societal level, because society is composed of individuals, we see rising symptoms of stress on a societal scale. And this includes societal diseases such as crime, terrorism, domestic violence, even terrorism and war. It is the leading theory in the field of conflict resolution today that the first stage in the emergence of war is mounting tensions among rival factions in critical hotspots throughout the world, including political and ethnic and religious tensions that fuel violence, terrorism, and conflict. So it is commonly understood that the driving factor, the driving cause in the outbreak of war is mounting tensions. Now, in the field of medical science, it has become increasingly commonplace and extensively scientifically documented that physiological stress and the symptoms of stress, ill health, antisocial behavior, can be quickly relieved through certain stress-reducing programs, especially stress-reducing meditation, like transcendental meditation, that give deep rest and dissolve stress very efficiently in the individual physiology, resulting in behaviors that are simply less stressed, less narrowly self-centered, and more expansive and comprehensive global thinking and global behavior. On a societal level, there is extensive research over the past 20 years at least that supports that the approach of stress management on a societal scale, strategically applied in critical spots throughout the world, can effectively diffuse societal stress and tension, leading to the prevention of outbreak and war. Now, this may seem surprising that the introduction of, for example, transcendental meditation to even a relatively small subportion of a population has been so effective, as we'll see it has, in the reduction of violent conflict. So I'd like to explain a little bit more about how that works. But first, take a look for a moment at the very first study that was published in the prestigious Yale Journal of Conflict Resolution, testing the effect of this meditative intervention in the prevention of war in the Middle East. Indeed, this experiment took place during the peak of the Lebanon War, and it assessed the influence of groups of many hundreds of meditating experts practicing one widely practiced and extensively researched scientific program for the reduction of stress, transcendental meditation, as introduced many years ago by His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. That technique, which is certainly the world's most widely practiced, extensively researched, and broadly prescribed of any technique today for the prevention of stress and stress-related illness and for the full development of the individual health and human potential. Several hundred people embedded in the heart of Jerusalem and in the Middle East produced enough of a relief in tension among those individuals and all those around them that there was a marked reduction, 80% drop in war deaths, war-related injuries. There was rapid progress towards peace. There was reduced levels of conflict in all possible measures. And if you look at this chart, this shows a 2-month period where there's a dotted line that moves up and down that measures the daily numbers of volunteers collectively meditating as a group in Jerusalem, which rises and falls on a daily basis over the 2-month duration of this experiment. And superimposed on the dotted line is a solid line, which is labeled Composite Index of Quality of Life. But essentially, this composite index, or solid line, is the weighted sum of war deaths, war injuries, progress towards peace, and levels of conflict. And what you see, even in the raw data presented here, prior to the benefit of statistical analysis, a very visible covariation in the progress towards peace and drop in violent conflict, varying with the number of people collectively meditating in this densely populated social environment. The statistical significance of this scientific finding that there was marked reduced in violence, crime, war deaths, war injuries, when the people in society were less stressed and increasingly calm. This phenomenon was statistically significant at better than 1 part in 10,000, which in the social sciences is a rare and highly rigorous scientific finding. We'll come back to other studies of this type and discuss more the detailed mechanisms of how this works, but I just wanted to indicate that it is well known today that mounting religious, political, and ethnic tensions drive terrorism and violence, and that it is possible to reduce such societal stress and quell violence in even open warfare in war-torn areas. And again, we'll talk about the principles of this in a moment because it's extremely fascinating and very important. But I should just begin by saying it is not necessary even to eliminate societal stress completely to reduce the incidence of violent conflict. There is a phase transition in the functioning of society, which is a many-body system. It's a collective system, when the stress or entropy or chaos drops below a certain critical threshold. It is just like water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't boil at 211. So if you have a pan of milk on the stove and the temperature reaches 212 degrees and the milk starts to boil over, it can be very difficult to control the boiling over of the milk, to contain it just by trying to hold the lid on it. But instead, a more experienced cook would take the lid off and sprinkle a few cool drops of water on the surface of the milk. Suddenly, the entire bubbling cauldron settles down. The boiling subsides. That's not because the milk suddenly has become cool, just that it's dropped slightly below the boiling point. Milk doesn't boil at 211 degrees. So even if you can reduce societal stress to a certain degree, you can put a lid on war. There comes a point in the dynamic of society where the desire for revenge and retaliation becomes so intense that an act of violence almost always leads to a retaliatory act. In that circumstance, you are in an equation of escalating social violence, where one act leads to another, and that leads to a third. In a society that is a bit less stressed, so that an act of violence does not always result in a retaliatory act, that tips the balance of the equations and casts you in a situation of decreasing or de-escalating social violence. So it's not necessary to eliminate societal stress to eliminate the outbreak of war. It's just sufficient to reduce stress below the boiling point to tip society into a more coherent, more favorable phase transition where that type of extreme social chaos, the outbreak of war, simply doesn't occur. This was a very heuristic understanding of the very simple idea of diffusing the very cause of war, mounting societal tensions between rival factions, diffusing the very cause of war by targeting and neutralizing the negativity, the enmity, the stress and the strife that drives violent conflict. Until you do that, negotiated treaties and diplomatic settlements are not worth the paper they're written on. Because these paper treaties among elected representatives of rival factions historically don't hold. The ceasefires don't hold for more than a day or so, in the Middle East, for example. Not as long as the people themselves, the citizens of these rival factions, are seething in the desire for vengeance and retaliation. It's impossible to control the behavior of the people through a paper treaty. We need a more foundational approach to preventing war that gets to the cause of war, the enmity, the hatred, the societal stress and tensions that can be effectively neutralized with remarkable effectiveness, I would say, as we will see, through a scientific approach to dissolving individual and societal tensions. So this is a very simplistic introduction, but a valid analysis of what is taking place. I'd like to discuss, since we are scientists, a much more complete and I think profound understanding of the dynamics of consciousness, particularly the collective consciousness of society, so we can better understand the uncanny effectiveness, according to research, of this effect of preventing violent conflict, and thereby ultimately perhaps putting an end to this institution of war and reliance on weapons of mass destruction. In order to understand the dynamics of collective consciousness responsible for the spreading of social coherence and the prevention of violent conflict, we need to understand consciousness a little bit better. And for this, we need to understand the latest discoveries of the physical universe in which we live. And for those of you who are not physical scientists, let me take a moment to review the most up-to-date understanding of the structure of the physical universe. And on the basis of understanding the structure of the universe in which we live, we can understand really for the first time the nature and origin of consciousness and the dynamics of collective consciousness. This first chart summarizes 50 years of scientific progress, particularly in the field of physics, elementary particle physics, and quantum field theory, and it shows the structure of our universe as comprised of layers of creation, from superficially diverse at the top of this chart to fundamentally unified at the foundation of this chart. This chart shows a hierarchical structure of natural law from fundamental unity to surface diversity. At the surface of the chart is the classical world of macroscopic objects. As you go more deeply into the layers of this chart, you come to the molecular, atomic, nuclear, and subnuclear levels of nature's functioning, each corresponding to smaller time and distance scales. Towards the bottom of the chart, you see the four forces of nature on the left, the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces, plus gravity, and the particles on which they act. On the right-hand side of this chart, the up and down quarks, the charged and neutral leptons. The Nobel Prize was awarded some 30 years ago almost now for understanding that this surface complexity, the multiplicity of forces and multiplicity of particles at the nuclear level, gives rise to fundamental, or gives way to fundamental simplicity at more fundamental space-time scales. In particular, it shows at the next subtler or deeper level of the laws of physics, the electroweak unified level, 100 times smaller than the atomic nucleus, a phase transition occurs in the structure and function of natural law, whereby two superficially diverse forces, the weak and electromagnetic forces, are understood to be fundamentally one. And in the same stroke of unification of two of the four forces of nature, we see a simultaneous unification of the different particle types of nature, a unification of up and down type quarks, and a unification of charged and neutral leptons, leading to a more fundamentally unified, simpler level of understanding of natural law. And the profound success of this Nobel Prize-winning electroweak unified theory led theorists to rapidly construct grand unified theories of the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces. And within the past decade, since the so-called superstring revolution, ultimately the fulfillment of Einstein's lifelong dream, the discovery of completely unified field theories in which all the fundamental forces on the left-hand side of this chart and all the particles of nature on the right-hand side of this chart, all of these are understood as one, just different vibrational degrees of freedom of what are called superstrings, excitations of a universal, unified superstring field. If I can be slightly didactic about it, superstring theory describes the entire universe and everything in it, all the elementary particles, and all the forces of nature, all of these Bose and Fermi fields, all these particles and forces are just different states of vibration of a fundamental field of unity, like little ripples on the surface of an unbounded ocean of existence. little ripples or energy eigenstates of this universal field or superstring field. Superstring theory thereby locates the unified source of all the diversified laws of nature that uphold the universe at every level: nuclear, atomic, molecular, macroscopic, planetary, astrophysical, cosmological scales. All this total range of natural law has a unified source in the unified field. And unified field theories of quantum physics also lay out the sequential process of diversification, the so-called process of spontaneous symmetry breaking, in which fundamental wholeness, fundamental unity, sequentially gives rise to surface diversity. I want to emphasize before I move on that this discovery of the unified field has far more than philosophical influence. The unified field, for example, in this chart, is described by an extremely compact formula, the Lagrangian of the superstring, at the very top of this chart. And I show this rather simple formula to emphasize that this is not a philosophical discovery, but a precise and mathematical reality, which is a great mathematical triumph in its own right. It took 50 years for physics to discover, to construct a viable theory of gravity. Sure, there were classical theories of gravity, Einstein's gravity, before him Newton's laws of gravity, but even almost from the very introduction of Einstein's general relativistic field equations, it was known from the beginning that this phenomenon of curved space-time was incompatible with quantum mechanics. That space-time could have a definite shape, curved or flat, violates the uncertainty principle, which is a principle really of non-specifiability, or an all possibilities quality to the laws of nature, which would resist the limitation of space to any one shape. So it was necessary from a very early time to update Einstein's general relativistic field equations, Einstein's theory of gravity, to be consistent with quantum mechanics. And that was no small task. 50 years of trying to construct point-particle theories of the gravitational force through a spin-tube graviton particle resisted quantization because such early attempts at a quantum theory of gravity were beset by what are called infinities or divergences and were ultimately mathematically inconsistent. The superstring theory eliminates fundamentally these gravitational infinities or divergences, giving us a mathematically finite and sensible theory from the beginning. We could discuss, perhaps, if there's interest at some later point, why string theory avoids the pitfalls of earlier attempts to quantize gravity, but the important thing is that it works and that it is unique, essentially unique. That superstring theory is a quantum mechanically consistent, mathematically consistent theory of gravity. And that in itself was an absolutely essential triumph, allowing us to wed for the first time the physics of the very large, including the curvature of the universe itself, with the physics of the very small, the world of the quantum. So superstring theory, as we see from this formula, has a very precise and really unique mathematical structure. And more important, superstring theory predicts the stage-by-stage emergence of the more diversified levels of the laws of nature. As this chart shows, the top equation of superstring theory leads to the Lagrangian of n equals 1 locally supersymmetric grand unified field theory, or grand unification for short, which is certainly a much longer formula. Only a tiny fragment of it has actually been presented here for reasons of visibility, legibility. But it is a rigorous derivation which shows the emergence of grand unification from the fundamental field of unity, the field of superunification, and like that, stage-by-stage emergence of the diversified structure of natural law from the field of fundamental unity. This is vitally important for many reasons, because prior to the discovery of the superstring, prior to the discovery of the unified field, grand unification was a matter of guesswork. The whole of physics was a path of exploration from the superficial to the profound, from the top within, in ignorance of the foundation of the laws of nature within the field of unity. Being deprived of its unified foundation, really, physics was afloat. It was anchorless and rudderless, adrift. So attempts to construct a grand unified field theory were really based upon guesswork and ignorance. There was George I. Glashow, grand unified field theory based on the gauge group SU5. Then there was O10, and there was flipped SU5 and E6 and so forth, and there was really no way to sort out which of these theories were correct, because the level of grand unification is far beyond the range of particle accelerator experimentation. Now, with the superstring, the situation changes completely. The superstring theory allows us to predict the structure of grand unification from its unified source in the unified field. And when you predict the structure of grand unification from first principles, from the field of unity, through the sequential process of symmetry breaking, you can see right away that the only grand unified field theories that can emerge from the superstring, that means from a realistic string model with a level 1 Kac-Moody algebra, the only such grand unified theories that can emerge are those without adjoint representations of Higgs bosons, and that uniquely concludes that what is called supersymmetric flipped SU5 is the only grand unified theory that is logically consistent with the superstring. So the guesswork of model building has been removed largely once physics has become established in its unified foundation. So the important point is, this discovery of the superstring is vitally important to give us, for the first time, a mathematically consistent theory of gravity, to give us, for the first time, a derivable structure to the grand unified field theory, to give us, for the first time, an understanding of the ratio of the tau lepton and B quark masses, which were arbitrary before, to give us, for the first time, an understanding of why the electron mass, for example, is exactly equal and opposite to the proton mass, something that is mere coincidence in the absence of superunification, and so forth. So we're not talking about philosophy here, we're talking about scientific discovery of the foremost magnitude, which has scientific and practical results as well as purely profound philosophical significance. Last thing I'll say about this, before moving to its practical applications and discussing the very important field of consciousness and collective consciousness, is that the discovery of the unified field and the mathematical dynamics of unity, this Lagrangian of the superstring, to use the language of modern science for now, the discovery of the structure of unity, the unified field, is really the discovery of the constitution of the universe. The constitution of the universe. Yes, the universe has a constitution, just as every nation has a constitution. Constitution just means the foundational level of national law, the fundamental laws of the land upon which all the other superficial laws are constructed, laws governing human commerce, human interaction. All those laws derive their authenticity, their authority, their constitutionality with reference to the foundational level of natural law, the constitution of the nation. Similarly now in nature. Nature has a foundational level of natural law. The self-interacting dynamics of unity at the basis of life's diversity. That is the fountainhead of all the diverse laws of nature that govern the universe at every level. That constitution of the universe, the self-interacting dynamics of unity, is the source of the vast orderliness displayed throughout the ever-expanding universe. All the order we see in the mathematical structure of the elementary particles, in the structure of atoms and molecules and macroscopic objects and celestial and astrophysical and cosmological objects, all the laws, all the order in the universe has its unified source in this unified field, in this self-interacting dynamics of unity, which is really, therefore, the constitution of the universe, the foundational level of natural law. The critical importance of this discovery for human life and human behavior is not yet in laboratory applications of the unified field because the domain of superunification, the Planck scale, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, is still far beyond the range of modern accelerator technology. The profound impact, however, of this most fundamental of scientific discoveries is its impact on human consciousness and on human life. For although this fundamental field of unity is beyond the range of today's particle accelerators, it is not beyond the scope, not beyond the range of the human mind, not beyond human comprehension. Indeed, the human mind is capable of appreciating and even directly experiencing this fundamental unity of life, especially, well, firstly, of course, through education, through mathematics and so forth. We gain some intellectual understanding of unity through the study of unified field theories, which have their correlates, by the way, in mathematics, with set theory, topos theory, category theory, in chemistry, with the transition state and other state-of-the-art cutting-edge ideas in chemistry. Unity is the cutting edge of scientific knowledge in virtually every scientific discipline. So certainly intellectually we can gain some appreciation of the unity of life. But throughout time, throughout all the great traditions of the world, especially the spiritual traditions of the world, have been programs of meditation, techniques of inner exploration of consciousness, which, by turning human awareness powerfully within, allow the individual mind to experience deeper and deeper levels of consciousness, as this chart shows. Transcendental Meditation Program, which was brought to the world 50 years ago by His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, world's foremost scientist of consciousness and certainly foremost Vedic scholar, revived the Transcendental Meditation Program and advanced techniques from the Vedic tradition, the world's most ancient and highly developed science of consciousness. And this Transcendental Meditation Program, certainly very widely practiced and extensively researched scientific technique to turn human awareness systematically within to experience deeper levels of thought, deeper levels of the mind, deeper levels of human intelligence that correspond to the experience of deeper levels of intelligence in nature, as this chart shows. The exploration of deeper and deeper levels of intelligence, more abstract and expanded levels of human experience, this inward march of the mind culminates in the experience of what is called pure consciousness. Consciousness left alone, wide awake within its own nature. The maximally expanded state of human comprehension, which we can call the meditative state, or the state of pure consciousness, which, it turns out, according to modern physiological science, is a fourth major state of consciousness, physiologically and subjectively distinct from waking, dreaming, or sleeping. In this meditative state, this maximally expanded state of human comprehension, the body is in a profound state of rest. It gains a reduction in the metabolic rate, which is at least 3 times deeper than the deepest portion of rest gained during a night's sleep. This is the reason, for example, Transcendental Meditation is prescribed worldwide by tens of thousands of doctors, why the National Institutes of Health of the United States government has poured tens of millions of dollars into research and application of Transcendental Meditation to prevent stress and to reverse high blood pressure, to prevent heart disease and stroke, because of the profound stress-reducing influence of such a deep state of physiological rest. But in addition to the state of physiological rest, human awareness is wide awake and maximally expanded, beyond boundaries, where the specific objects of a thought, the isolated content of any thought, which always has some specific subjective qualities, good, bad, positive, negative, red, green, hot, cold. All these qualities, specific qualities of experience, they fade from the awareness as the mind retires from this localized process of waking experience, this sensory experience, and as the mind retires from objects of thought and objects of emotion, it comes to a point where it is free of objects, subjectively unbounded, not localized by anything. This state of unbounded awareness, pure consciousness, the meditative state, is accompanied by a profound and immediate onset of orderliness of brain functioning. The brain becomes highly synchronized. The electrical activity in the left hemisphere is correlated with the electrical activity in the right hemisphere. The frontal lobe, the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobes of the brain all come into a profound state of neurological synchrony, what is called global EEG coherence. This next chart shows a glimpse of the striking transformation in the style of functioning of the human brain during the meditative experience, during the practice of transcendental meditation. On the left-hand side, it shows a subject that was just instructed in the transcendental meditation technique, and in time flows upward in these charts. And the horizontal axis simply shows the frequency of the cognitive processing or electrical activity of the brain. What you see in a new meditator, when they begin the practice, and as the mind settles down and comprehension expands, you see the emergence of these little yellow mountain peaks. These mountain peaks signify more than 90% correlation in the electrical activity in the left and right hemispheres of the brain. As you move to the right, in the next two charts, you see that after several months of regular meditation and after 2 years of twice daily practice of transcendental meditation, these little yellow mountain peaks become more prevalent and more permanent. Indeed, on the right-hand side, we see that this coherent functioning of the brain has spread from what was originally the alpha frequency to encompass the full range of frequencies of cognitive functioning. That just means whatever the brain is doing in integration. All the different areas of the mind and personality become profoundly integrated and function in a synchronous way. And this final chart also shows at the top that even after the practice of meditation has been stopped and the individual opens their eyes and resumes activity, this orderliness of brain functioning persists. It becomes an increasingly permanent feature of the functioning of the brain. Well, at this point, let me pause to say, as an educator, this technique of transcendental meditation, which brings global EEG coherence, already represents an educational breakthrough of the foremost magnitude. And that is because EEG coherence correlates scientifically with rising IQ, increased intelligence. It correlates with increased creativity, improved memory, short-term and long-term memory, learning ability, improved grade point average, improved alertness and reaction time, enhanced moral reasoning, increased psychological stability and emotional maturity. Everything good about the brain depends on its orderly functioning. And now, through something as simple as a universal, scientific, non-religious practice that can be learned and practiced by anyone from the age of 10 years old. Now, through a simple approach that expands human comprehension, orderliness of brain functioning, and intelligence and creativity and everything that goes with it, can be systematically, longitudinally developed in students of any age, from any culture. So this discovery of the meditative state, this fourth state of human consciousness, is an educational breakthrough of the foremost magnitude. And I'll come back in a few moments to dwell with you a little bit on the profound impact of this experience on human behavior and even world peace in a very, very practical way. But first, let me show you two research slides that document what I have just said. The first is one of many, many studies showing increased IQ in university students and high school students and so forth, simply through the addition to the educational routine of twice daily practice of transcendental meditation. This is already a very striking transformation in what has been the predominant view of human potential, which has been a very bleak view of human potential. The understanding in the past has been that intelligence peaks at adolescence. And by the time one achieves one's 20s, especially late 20s, there begins to be a precipitous decline in the amount of gray matter and a reduction in the raw intelligence that becomes increasingly sharp in one's later years. This turns out to be an obsolete and really unnecessarily bleak view of human potential, because now it turns out, according to research, that the brain is remarkably plastic and malleable. And it has the capability of forging new connections and learning new things, learning new skills, and developing the gray matter throughout life, if it is properly exercised, if it is exposed to the type of experience that engages the brain holistically and develops the total brain. Well, what research has shown that among the whole range of human experiences, from the study of the arts, the study of science, or the study of language, or any experience of any kind, the experience of pure consciousness is unique among the whole range of human experiences, and that only this experience of unbounded awareness, deep inner silence, engages the total brain, engages the brain holistically, and brings global EEG coherence for the balanced development of the total brain. The next chart shows one very striking application of this discovery, still yet on the individual level. In a moment we'll talk about society. What we see in education today all too often, due to the levels of stress in our schools, particularly in our congested inner cities, and due to the predominance of alcohol dependence and drug abuse, even among younger children, at an age where stress-related illnesses like high blood pressure are increasingly childhood diseases, no longer limited to adults. So during this time of increasing stress, and due to education in its current form, the brain is typically not developed in a holistic way. Instead, what you see all too often are what are called functional holes in the brain, shown here on the right. This is the brain of a violent offender, a prison inmate, and this is a so-called SPECT brain imaging technology that measures blood flow to the brain. And what you see on the right are what appear to be holes in the brain. Now, these holes are not actually gaps in the gray matter, but are so-called functional holes, parts of the brain that simply aren't firing. And because they're not consuming energy, they're not being refreshed with new oxygen and new nutrients. The blood flow shuts down. You also see on the right-hand side a clustering of these functional holes at the top of the chart, which is the front of the brain, the critical prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is supposed to be our rational filter against primitive, aggressive, impulsive, violent behavior. It is the area of planning and judgment and moral reasoning. And when it shuts down, when it is no longer firing, as is so often the case, the result of education today, that means that individual doesn't have the natural filter against this sort of violent, impulsive, self-destructive behavior. However, even among such violent offenders, and many, many such studies have been done in prisons throughout the world today, even in violent offenders with these entrenched functional holes, this extreme metabolic imbalance in the brain, the meditative experience, which is so easily learned, in fact, is very, very popular in a prison setting because these prisons are pressure cookers of stress, and everyone, even the guards, are just keenly desirous of any relief from that pressure. In the prisons even, the experience of meditation is so easy and brings immediate relief and engages the total brain. And by engaging the brain holistically, restores blood flow to the entire brain, restores metabolic balance, and over a period of time, and we're just talking about a matter of months, not years, the proper balanced functioning of the brain is restored, as shown on the left-hand side of the same chart. Before leaving this study, let me dwell for a moment, just for a moment, on the potential impact of just this on the peace of our world and on the subject of crime in the world. Let's take a case study of Senegal in Africa, French-speaking country, which had, some decade or so ago, an extreme prison crisis of extreme overcrowding, leading to almost daily riots, and the cause of the intense crowding within the prisons of Senegal was the rate of return to prison was about 90%, which is a very high rate of recidivism, even by U.S. standards. So most people leaving the prisons were not rehabilitated and very quickly migrated back into the penal system, back into the prison system. Perhaps out of desperation, the Minister of Justice decided there was nothing to lose. Why not introduce instruction in the Transcendental Meditation program of His Holiness Maharshi Mahesh Yogi, which is, by far the most extensively researched, widely practiced, and broadly prescribed of any such program in the world. Why not introduce this into the prison system on a voluntary basis? And very, very quickly, Transcendental Meditation spread like wildfire, and before long, every prison inmate and every prison guard were enjoying the benefits of Transcendental Meditation, and within a very short time, about 14 weeks, the rate of return to prison dropped from about 90% to 6%. Before very long, a third of the prisons had closed due to lack of repeat clients. Such a marked transformation in the field of criminology in that country led to a television broadcast by the Minister of Justice, who was speaking at a podium in the presence of the President of the country, who was seated nearby. And the Minister of Justice was actually weeping on national television, explaining how the introduction of Transcendental Meditation completely transformed criminal justice in his country and completely transformed the country. So even in this very limited perspective that we've discussed until now, and we'll move on in just a moment, just introducing Transcendental Meditation in a very limited way in the field of criminal rehabilitation is enough to rehabilitate and essentially all but eliminate this vicious cycle of crime and the punishment of crime that exists in every country today. That in itself would have a dramatic impact on crime levels in any country, and it is so cost-effective and easy to do. But let us leave for a moment this phenomenon of the physiological benefits and the rehabilitative benefits and the effects on the brain of Transcendental Meditation and consider more fundamentally now the field of consciousness and the field of collective consciousness, and how we can very efficiently handle and really palpably transform the collective consciousness and quality of life of an entire country, sufficient to render a country free from war and effectively invincible. That means impervious to war, as we will see. Well, let us go back to the premise we introduced 20 minutes ago and consider this chart again for a moment of the fundamental capability of the human nervous system to experience this field of pure consciousness within, this maximally expanded state of human comprehension in which human awareness identifies with the unified field. Well, this is a remarkable discovery, that human awareness has the capability of traversing the total range of natural law from superficial to profound, and human awareness can open to the direct experience of this field of unity within. This essentially establishes consciousness in its fundamental nature as a universal field. Many, from Heisenberg to Schrödinger, have speculated that consciousness at its basis was a universal field, a field that we all share in common. That, yes, of course, we have our localized awareness, our individual minds and intellects and egos and physical bodies, of course. But all of this, according to Heisenberg, for example, was just a wave, a localized wave, an individual wave on an unbounded ocean of consciousness, an ocean of existence. And that individual waves on this ocean, in a sense, correspond to individual consciousnesses, individual minds, individual physiologies. It seems, on the one hand, rather common sense that the most fundamental reality of individual existence, which is what? Our own inner consciousness, our own subjectivity, that one abstract aspect of our existence which never changes, which has been the same since birth, even though our beliefs have changed, our environments have changed, our occupations have changed, our minds and bodies have certainly changed. Something about our life has been beyond change, changeless. that abstract aspect of life that never changes is our very subjectivity, the field of consciousness itself, which is open to direct experience, no longer speculation, no longer philosophical exploration, but open to direct experience in this most expanded, silent state of human consciousness, where consciousness alone exists, free to explore its unbounded nature. So, this fundamental capability of human consciousness to identify with the unified field, and this identity of this field of consciousness at the basis of mind, and this unified field at the basis of matter, the equivalence of these two fields is of fundamental importance. And I wanted to spend perhaps 5 minutes with you in exploring this fundamental and important identity. It is important because when it comes to phenomena of collective consciousness and the exploration of the dynamics of the collective consciousness of society, it is important to understand that the collective consciousness of society has a physical foundation, that there is a fundamental field of consciousness in which all the individual members of society simply represent localized excitations. Is that really true? That human awareness can experience this unbounded field of existence, the unified field? And the answer is yes. First of all, if we examine in this chart for just one instant the fundamental qualities of the unified field of physics as derivable from the Lagrangian of the superstring, which this chart does, and I know that it's not really possible to read this chart in detail on your video screen, so I will send it to all of our participating members by post. But the qualities of the unified field are the qualities of pure consciousness. There's a qualitative identity, qualitative correspondence. And without going deeply into it, let me just mention that the unified field of physics is a field of intelligence. It is the fountainhead of all the laws of nature. The laws of nature are the orderly principles governing the behavior of our universe. These orderly principles or laws of nature are what give nature its orderliness, that make it predictable, that make it intelligible to the mind. Since the unified field is the most concentrated field, because the unified field is the unified fountainhead of all these laws of nature, it must itself be the most concentrated field of intelligence in nature. And mathematically, you can certainly show that it is. But not just intelligence, dynamic intelligence. Because the quantum principle guarantees increasing dynamism at fundamental scales. The uncertainty principle says that the deeper you go into the structure of nature, from the atomic to the nuclear to subnuclear levels, the more dynamic, intensely dynamic nature becomes. That is why, for example, nuclear power is 1,000,000 times more powerful than chemical energy. Because chemical energy is based upon the manipulation of atoms in a molecule. Nuclear power is based upon the manipulation of the nucleons in a nucleus. 1,000,000 times smaller, 1,000,000 times more fundamental, and hence 1,000,000 times more powerful than chemical energy. Like that, due to the uncertainty principle, the deeper you go, the more profoundly energetic nature becomes. And at the level of the unified field, the Planck scale of 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, which is the ultimate time and distance scale, that energy density becomes essentially infinite. So the unified field is a concentrated field of dynamic intelligence and self-aware. This quality of self-awareness, or the non-abelian property of self-interaction or nonlinearity, present in the unified field, is not present, for example, at more superficial levels. The electromagnetic force, for example, the field of light, doesn't have this nonlinear self-aware property. Two flashlight beams will pass right through each other with no interaction, no scattering, no awareness whatsoever of each other's presence. You can perform this experiment at home. In contrast, the unified field responds dynamically to its own presence due to its non-abelian property or nonlinear property of self-interaction. And it's a very good thing that the unified field is self-aware, self-interacting, because there's nothing else down there for it to interact with. It is due to its own dynamical self-interaction that it systematically generates the diversified laws of nature governing the universe. So, qualitatively, we know the unified field is a self-aware, dynamic field of intelligence. And those are the properties of consciousness. So I bring this up because for many material scientists especially, the idea that consciousness is fundamental in nature is new, very novel. In the past, consciousness has somehow thought to emerge by many material scientists as a byproduct of electrophysiological processes of the brain. Certainly, the electrophysiological processes of the brain are instrumental to shaping the content of our experience, to cognitive processing, to sensory experience, and everything. But the actual phenomenon of the wakefulness itself, consciousness itself, transcends the physical brain and is fundamental in nature. Those who studied quantum mechanics should already be aware of the fact that the deeper you go in the structure of nature, the less material nature becomes, and the more the qualities of consciousness become expressed through things like the non-locality of the collapse of the wave function and many other features of quantum mechanics. But it is important to point out, I think for some of us at least, that the phenomenon of consciousness has defied description on the basis of such a superficial approach as a purely emergent phenomenon of the brain. It doesn't work philosophically. It doesn't work neurophysiologically. No neuroscientist has ever found that magical bundle of nerves that creates consciousness in the brain. There is no such bundle of nerves. Consciousness bubbles up from within every cell. Indeed, from within the DNA in every living cell. And the quantum mechanical nature of the DNA within the cell. The roots of human consciousness go very, very deep in the structure of natural law, from the classical to the quantum mechanical to the quantum field theoretic. So we have this qualitative identity of consciousness in the unified field, but more importantly, in this scientific age, mathematical age, I wanted to show for you a very important and profound quantitative verification, a quantitative correspondence between the structure of consciousness, pure consciousness, the most fundamental state of consciousness, this unbounded unified field of consciousness, and the unified field at the basis of physical matter. This quantitative correspondence can be seen on two levels. First, the so-called energy eigenspectrum of the unified field, the stable vibrational states of the superstring. This chart summarizes the stable vibrational states of the superstring, the so-called energy eigenmodes, the resonant frequencies of unity. The resonant frequencies, or energy eigenstates of the unified field, fall into 5 fundamental categories labeled by their quantum mechanical spins. Reading from left to right on this chart, we have on the left the spin 2 graviton, responsible for the field of gravity. The spin 3/2 gravitino field, its supersymmetric partner. The spin 1 forces, that's the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces. The spin 1/2 matter fields, the quarks and leptons. And the spin 0 Higgs fields. These 5 categories are the only categories consistent with mathematics and with quantum mechanics. That means the whole physical universe can be understood as a combination of these 5 fundamental elements or ingredients, the quantum spin types. For completeness, though, let's see the same chart again, and I'll express the very same reality through the lens of supersymmetry. Today's supersymmetric unified quantum field theories present an even simpler picture, because in supersymmetry, these 5 fundamental elements are further unified. On the left, on the bottom, we see the gravity superfield, which is a unification of the spin 2 graviton and spin 3/2 gravitino. We have the category of gauge superfields, which constitute the spin 1 forces and spin 1/2 matter fields. And finally, matter superfields, the unification of spinless Higgs fields and spin 1/2 matter fields. So whether we talk in the language of 3, the supersymmetric unified quantum field theories, or in the language of 5, it's the same reality. These are the fundamental frequencies of unity, the building blocks of the entire creation, the emergent physical structures from the non-physical field of unity, beyond space and time. The field of quantum gravity, superunification. Now if we turn to the field of consciousness, the field of consciousness in its maximally expanded state of least excitation, the ground state of consciousness, the meditative state. This consciousness has its own set of reverberant frequencies, its own energy eigenmodes, which occur when this field of consciousness arises into the active fields of thought and speech and action. But the most fundamental impulses of thought, finest level of feeling, have a very verifiable structure. The modes of consciousness have this fivefold structure of Akash, Vayu, Tejas, Apas, and Prithvi. The same 5 fundamental elements that have been identified as the vibrational frequencies of the superstring. This next chart shows this correspondence a little bit more clearly. It shows on the left-hand side, from top to bottom, the 5 fundamental spin types of quantum field theory, the 5 fundamental elements of the physical universe. On the right-hand side, it shows the 5 fundamental vibrational states of consciousness, those aspects or modes of consciousness responsible for physical creation. These are, again, Akasha, Vayu, Tejas, etc. Now first, if we consider this correspondence purely structurally, we see 5 on the left and 5 on the right. But we also see on the left what we described before, a very specific pairing of these 5 elements into 3 more holistic entities called superfields, the gravity, gauge, and matter superfields. On the right, it turns out, this very same pairing is experienceable in terms of human consciousness and is described in the Vedic literature. Vedic literature is the classic text of consciousness. Very, very precisely, very lucidly, and very extensively, the structure of consciousness and its reverberant modes, the physical expressions of consciousness into thought and matter, are of these 5 types that admit, as we can see again, 3 fundamental pairings. Akasha and Vayu on the top unite in what is called Vata Prakriti. Tejas and Apas below that unite into the structure of Pitta Prakriti. Apas and Prithvi on the bottom unite to form Kapha Prakriti. So these identical pairings are considered to be fundamental from the standpoint of both modern science and the Vedic science of consciousness, open to direct experience. So here we have a profound quantitative correspondence between the modes of consciousness and the modes of the unified field, which powerfully support the identity of this field of pure consciousness, the meditative state, and the unified field at the basis of the physical universe. If we could look back at this chart for just one moment longer, we could, if we had time, and I'll just do one quick example, look at each of these realities, the spin 2 graviton, the spin 3/2 gravitino, etc., and see the precise structural and functional correspondence between the 5 elements of Vedic science, the 5 modes of consciousness. We'll just look at the top one, the spin 2 graviton. What is the spin 2 graviton? What is the force of gravity? Well, according to Einstein, the field of gravity is nothing other than the curvature of space. Space-time as a dynamical medium. Space-time as subtle substance. What is Akasha according to direct experience? What is Akasha according to the Vedic literature? It is space as subtle substance, the subtlest of all elements, sometimes translated as ether. So the correspondence between the modes of consciousness, the physical expressions of consciousness, and the physical expressions of the superstring, one by one, are the same. Same in number, same in structure, same in function, providing a very profound quantitative correspondence between the unified field of consciousness and the unified field of physics, establishing their identity, which is very important for what we're going to understand shortly. For the sake of interest, and it is a fascinating field, and we'll take just a moment now, I would like to take this analysis one step deeper. We have seen in this chart the quantitative correspondence between the emergent structures that physically arise from the non-physical field of the superstring, or the non-physical field of consciousness. We've seen that these are 5 in number, and that can be integrated into three more holistic entities called prakritis, or superfields. But instead, let's look at the same chart a little more deeply. Let's not look at what are called energy eigenmodes. These are the physical expressions of the superstring, the vibrational states of the superstring that correspond to the fundamental particles and forces within the field of space and time. But let us instead now look deeper. Look below the Planck scale. Look deep in that area called the unified field. Let us consider now not the physical expressions of the unified field, but the unified field itself on its own unified level. On the level of the unified field itself, from the standpoint of the superstring, we don't have particles and forces. We have the dynamics of this abstract reality called a superstring in unmanifest spacetime, quantum geometry consisting of higher dimensions, 11 dimensions of space and time, or 10-dimensional spacetime. The superstring has its own, on its own level, the level of unity, has its own abstract vibrational degrees of freedom, they're called. Not energy eigenmodes, but vibrational degrees of freedom. These are just the different directions in which the string can vibrate. Let's think very concretely for an instant about a bosonic string in 10 dimensions. How many degrees of freedom does the string possess? Well, a string living in 10 dimensions of space-time, one dimension pertains to time, simply. A second dimension corresponds to the direction or axis of the string itself, and the remaining 8 spatial directions are perpendicular to the string, allowing the string 8 transverse directions in which it can vibrate. Therefore, it is said, students of physics say, the bosonic string in 10 space-time dimensions has 8 bosonic degrees of freedom, and so forth. Well, realistic implementations of the string today cast the string in a multi-dimensional, topologically non-trivial spacetime, a so-called supercompactified spacetime, unmanifest spacetime, in which the vibrational degrees of freedom are more complex. These internal degrees of freedom of the superstring are shown in the next final scientific chart. On the bottom of this chart, running from the extreme left to the extreme right, is the Lagrangian of the superstring in 2 formulations. The superstring in 10 space-time dimensions constitutes the first line, comprising 8 bosonic and 8 fermionic vibrational degrees of freedom. And underneath it is the somewhat more familiar formulation of the superstring in 4 space-time dimensions, comprising 64 plus 64 plus 64 equals 192 fermionic vibrational degrees of freedom. This number of 192 is not arbitrary. This is absolutely dictated to us by logical consistency, mathematical consistency, quantum consistency. There's nothing fuzzy about it. This is the nature, this is the structure of the constitution of the universe. It can be nothing else. 50 years of quantum gravity and a decade of superstring theory has shown us that this is the case. There is a very precise mathematical structure of unity, consistent with quantum mechanics and mathematics. And that is this 192-fold structure, the vibrational structure of the superstring. We could go into this at some point in much greater detail, but for now, just the number is significant. Now let us compare this scientifically verified mathematical structure of unity, the constitution of the universe from the standpoint of modern physics, compare that to the structure of human consciousness in its most expanded state, the state of pure consciousness. We have seen before that when consciousness emerges into the field of thought, speech, and action, it is all in terms of these 5 physical elements, the 5 fundamental physical degrees, physical vibrational states of consciousness. But within this completely abstract and unmanifest field of consciousness itself, prior to the emergence of concrete thought and action, within the abstract silence of consciousness itself, consciousness is heard reverberating. Consciousness is humming within itself. Consciousness is a very dynamic and lively reality. That's what makes consciousness awake. That's what makes awareness lively. It is teeming with unmanifest activity, Zitterbewegung, zero-point activity. This is the zero-point motion of consciousness, completely unmanifest vibrations of consciousness. And this unmanifest structure of consciousness, these silent sounds reverberating, this, by the way, is called Veda in the traditional language of meditation. Veda is the sound of silence. Veda is the self-interacting dynamics of consciousness, self-interacting dynamics of unity murmuring within itself, reverberating within itself. And the reverberations of consciousness, or Veda, open to direct experience by anyone, in any age, of any culture, or any educational background. Just experiencing transcendental consciousness or pure consciousness again and again, twice a day, for a period of time, develops more and more acute sensitivity in the experience of this silence, to the point where the delicate reverberations of silence are perceptible and innumerable. And they've all been mapped out. Since time immemorial, they've been mapped out in the structure of what is called Veda, the Rig Veda, the foundational aspect of the Vedic literature described as the blueprint of the universe, or the constitution of the universe in the language of His Holiness Maharshi Mahesh Yogi. If you look at the structure of silence, the self-interacting dynamics of consciousness, or Veda, open to direct experience in the simplest silent state of consciousness, you see that there are 192 fundamental reverberant states of consciousness, fundamental vibrational degrees of freedom of consciousness. The number 192 is fundamental. That is the number of syllables in the first sukta of the Rig Veda. That is the number of suktas or chapters in the first mandala of the Rig Veda. That is the number of suktas or chapters in the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda. The whole Veda is built upon this blueprint of 192. So this is a whole science of sequential unfoldment of unity to diversity. The whole Vedic science has been elucidated and elaborated in a scientific way in this scientific age by world-renowned Vedic scientist and scientist of consciousness, Maharshi. The whole science of the sequential unfoldment of unity to diversity, parallel to sequential, spontaneous symmetry breaking of modern physics, but frankly even more elaborately unfolded and certainly more accessible to the mind. But the structure of 192, the abstract, reverberant sounds of silence, the self-interacting dynamics of consciousness, again matches precisely the vibrational degrees of freedom of the superstring, showing again quantitatively the identity of our own pure consciousness, the meditative state, as the direct experience of this unified field of existence at the basis of the universe. So it's a very, very fundamental discovery. I've taken some time to lay it out for you quantitatively and qualitatively, but the important finding is, with immense practical significance for the development of the human brain, for the development and culturing of unity in human experience and unity and harmony in human behavior, for the dynamics of peace on earth and the prevention of war, as we'll see in just a moment, this discovery is critical. Human awareness, properly cultured, and easily so, has the fundamental capability of expanding to identify with the unified field, experiencing and living the scientific truth of the unity of life. Let me say it again. It's an absolutely fundamental discovery of world-transforming significance. Human awareness, properly cultured and easily so, is fundamentally capable of experiencing the unified field and living the scientific truth of the unity of life in all of one's thoughts and all of one's behavior towards others, providing the foundation for a unified field-based civilization, a foundation for a unified and peaceful world. Let's talk about the practical impact of all of this. First, I would like to introduce in just one slide, because time now is very limited, the beginning of a discussion to be taken up later of how this physical brain, how the human nervous system can experience such a fundamental level of reality. What is it in the structure of the human brain that makes it different from a rock, or different from a grasshopper, that gives us the capability of knowing the ultimate reality, living the truth of the unity of life? Well, it has to do with the very structure and function of the brain, as illuminated most graphically in the groundbreaking work of Professor Dr. Tony Nader, MD, PhD, foremost medical scientist, foremost neurophysiologist, really foremost scientist of our generation. He has explored, as I'll show you in a moment, the detailed mechanisms, physiological, neurophysiological mechanisms, which uphold the experience of unity, and that very, very fundamental discovery and analysis of the human brain, an analysis of the human nervous system, is so important for understanding the innate capability of the human mind to experience and live unity, that he has been honored as the international president of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, due to the profound global impact of his world-transforming discovery. A glimpse of that discovery is briefly provided here in just one slide, excerpted from an extraordinary 600-page treatise, in which he explores the entire structure of the brain and the whole human physiology, and see that that structure is designed to uphold the experience of unity, designed to uphold the experience of the unified field. For example, this chart shows the correlation between the 192 vibrational degrees of freedom of the superstring, which is the 192 sounds of the Veda, and the 192 ascending and descending reticular formations of the human nervous system, the nerve endings, which are the gateways to consciousness. This correlation is one of many within the brain and throughout the physiology that shows that the hardware of the human brain is designed to mirror the structure and function of the universe. That the structure and function of the constitution of the universe, the structure and dynamics of the unified field, is directly mirrored in the structure and function of the human brain and human nervous system, such that, properly cultured, with access to the proper software, through proper education to access our cosmic hardware, every human being, every human brain has the capability of resonating in this total structure of life, resonating in this total structure of the constitution of the universe, and living concretely the fundamental truth of the unity of life in higher states of consciousness, in which the total brain is developed holistically and an individual lives his or her full potential. So this is with respect to the individual. Now let us finish this discussion by talking about society. In particular, the point of this first conference is preventative defense, preventing war and social violence, including terrorism, by diffusing the acute societal tensions, the religious and political and ethnic tensions that fuel violence and terrorism and war. How can we do this? Well, let me remind you first that it is widely accepted now in the field of conflict resolution that the first stage in the outbreak of war, the first step, is mounting tensions among the rival factions, particularly in critical hotspots throughout the world. If you could actually target and neutralize those rising tensions, you would be neutralizing the very causative fact of war. Neutralizing war at its basis, so that the enmity doesn't arise to the point that enemies are born, preventing the very birth of an enemy. Extraordinary and highly practical, if it were just possible. And of course, the research shows that it is not only possible, but practical and even easy. Let me remind you very quickly about the empirical research on this, and then we'll return to the mechanisms of how this works physically. Well, I've already showed this one study, and I'll just remind you that this publication in the Yale Journal of Conflict Resolution sparked an entire industry. It really sparked a firestorm in the field of sociological research. It showed that, several hundred people to 1,000 people in Jerusalem were enough to produce a palpable, unmistakable transformation in the level of peace and calm and quality of life in Israel and in neighboring Lebanon, to the point where people woke up in the morning and simply didn't feel motivated to go out and commit violent acts. The result? 80% drop in war deaths, war injuries, profound progress towards peace, and so forth on the very days and the days following large groups of individuals meditating together. I'll explain the together in just a moment. This chart, which resulted in a reduction of war that was highly statistically significant, caused the editors of the Journal of Conflict Resolution to publish this paper along with a letter urging the scientific community to rush out and repeat this experiment, urging other scientific colleagues and collaborators to go back to the Middle East and stop the war temporarily through this meditative intervention. And as a result, over the next 821 days, over the next 2.25 years, 7 scientific expeditions, 7 scientific collaborations were assembled where thousands of individuals, as many as 8,000 at a time, were assembled into peace-promoting, coherence-creating groups of meditating experts, dedicating long hours, morning and afternoon, to producing as much of a peaceful influence as possible through their meditation and collective meditation effect to diffuse the social enmity and put an end to war. And in every one of these experiments shown in this chart, there was a highly statistically significant drop in war, an immediate drop in war. You can read just barely, I think, the T factors, which are essentially standard deviations, and each of these peace-promoting assemblies were statistically significant and had effect sizes of about 5, 4, and 4, and 5, and 3, and 4, and 5 standard deviations. That is a huge effect, about an 80% drop on average in war deaths, war-related injuries, and marked progress towards peace in the Middle East during these peace-promoting assemblies, but not at any other time. That final bar on the left-hand side of this chart, the small negative bar, shows the average trend of events in the 2.25-year period, which was a slight escalation in conflict, except during the 7 experimental periods of the meditative interventions. Now let's talk a little bit about how this works. Of course we know, on again a very heuristic level at first, that no man is an island. We inevitably affect one another. We have a profound influence on our families, on our friends, on our work environments, and if enough people are involved in such a meditative group, a profound influence that trickles throughout the whole society. This is the inevitable spillover effect of meditation. I'll talk about the mechanisms of it in a moment, but some of the mechanisms are frankly fairly obvious. Especially in a densely knit urban environment like Washington, D.C., New York City, Jerusalem, etc., people are very tightly interconnected, especially today with the internet and the media and telecommunications. The whole world is a shrinking world. The whole world really is a family. So inevitably we expect a spillover effect into society, but remarkably, the research shows a very fortunate and very dramatic amplification effect of the calming influence of meditation, peace-promoting influence of meditation, when the individual meditators practicing transcendental meditation and certain advanced techniques called the TM Siddhi program, including a technique called yogic flying, when these powerful meditation techniques are practiced together, techniques that have been derived from the Vedic literature specifically for their ability to dispel negativity in the environment. What we find is that the radiated influence of calm from such a coherence-creating group grows not linearly with the number of meditators in the group, but quadratically. This is very important and not unexpected. For the very same reason that 2 loudspeakers radiating the same sound in close physical proximity, or as this chart shows, 3 loudspeakers in close physical proximity, each one broadcasting the same music in coherent phase, and again in close physical proximity, produces 9 times the sound of a single loudspeaker. That's because those sound amplitudes add coherently if the speakers are close together. And that coherent summation of amplitudes leads to a combined amplitude 3 times as large, and as we all know, the power in a sound wave grows as the square of the amplitude, giving rise to 9 times the sound volume as you would get from a single loudspeaker. Same thing would be true of 3 radio antennas broadcasting an electromagnetic signal. Those antennas are often moved together within a certain very short distance to produce a coherent summation of amplitudes for a more intense effect. Also, it can be used strategically to beam that effect, as of course can be done with loudspeakers. But this is a universal principle of wave behavior or field behavior in nature, the so-called constructive interference that stems from the coherent summation of amplitudes, leading to this quadratic dependence or n-squared effect, where n is the number of participants in a coherence-creating assembly. This, and we'll show again a little bit more about the fundamental mechanisms, the physics behind this, but this is of immense practical significance. Because 30 years ago, when sociologists began to discover that when a city had perhaps 1 or 2% of its population practicing transcendental meditation, the research showed a marked reduction of crime rates in that city. It created great excitement. If we could teach 1% of an entire country, you'd see a real drop in crime for the whole nation. But in fact, now it seems to be easier than that. Because of this n-squared effect, the square root of 1% of a population turns out to be enough, empirically enough, to produce a marked, statistically significant, easily measurable reduction in crime, social violence, psychiatric crisis calls, domestic violence. All these symptoms of societal stress subside dramatically and immediately when that stress is diffused and when unity and positivity and coherence radiate through society. It becomes very practical and very cost-effective to have, employ, engage, train a coherence-creating group of peace-promoting, meditating experts that can really provide a profoundly unifying and calming influence for an entire society. Let's talk for a few more minutes about the principles that uphold this remarkable scientific discovery, a very practical way of preventing crime and even war, as we will see, and then we'll come back and end with a few comments about practical steps of implementation. Let us look again very briefly at the deep mechanics for the spreading of social coherence, for neutralizing enmity and preventing violent conflict. This chart again shows the structure of our physical universe from physical, gross, superficial, diversified, to more fundamental, subtler, more powerful levels of natural law, culminating in a unified field, purely abstract field of intelligence at the basis of matter, which is a very powerful field of intelligence, in fact, millions upon millions of times more fundamental and more powerful even than the nuclear force. When it comes to human interaction, looking at this chart, and the ways human beings can influence other human beings, and the way coherence can spread throughout a society, coherence can spread throughout a society at any level of physical existence. Gross physical, chemical, quantum mechanical, quantum field theoretic, and unified field theoretic. This chart attempts to summarize a topic which really could be a subject for a dedicated conference, and perhaps it will be. This chart summarizes the different levels of human interaction and the mechanisms for the spreading of social coherence through the group practice of the Transcendental Meditation Program and its advanced techniques, which again are used in all of these studies because this is a technology of consciousness that is the most widely practiced, extensively researched, and particularly researched for its ability to prevent crime and social violence. This chart shows that at a classical level, human beings inevitably influence one another through, for example, physical contact is one way of communicating an emotion. Verbal communication, of course, is another way of communicating an idea, communicating a feeling, communicating calm. A visual communication and olfactory communication is possible too, like a gesture at a traffic jam. That leads to a medium-range interaction. And of course today there's the telephone and the internet and media, which provide classical but long-range mechanisms of communication that inevitably link human beings together, so that inevitably we have an influence on each other, even at a distance. But what we're talking about here are deeper levels of human interaction that are based upon the fundamental field theoretic nature of consciousness. And I'll just mention two of these now and then leave the subject for further discussion. First is quantum mechanical. Quantum reality is vastly more profoundly interconnected than classical reality. Most of you on this call will be well aware of this, but I'll just mention that in quantum mechanics, once two objects or two individuals have interacted, from then on, those two objects remain correlated with each other. That means if something happens to one object, instantaneously that influence is felt on the other object, even if those objects are distantly separated, even space-like separated. That is an extraordinary result, an extraordinary prediction of quantum theory that has been verified innumerable times in the laboratory. It speaks about a far richer type of subtle interconnection of things than was ever suspected to be possible, even by Albert Einstein. So, for example, if two elementary particles are correlated, perhaps they both emerge from the decay fragments of another particle and are flying off at high velocities in opposite directions. If an observation is performed on one of those particles to determine its spin state, up or down, for example, instantaneously the correlated particle will undergo a simultaneous collapse to down or up, if the total initial spin was 0, for example. That is a very rich communication of influence over a distance. There's an infinity of information that gets communicated in just that one act, because quantum mechanically there is an infinite range of possibilities between spin up and spin down, or any superposition of up and down, and that indefinite state becomes definite upon measurement, and that communicates instantly across vast distances. Now, Einstein would insist, probably correctly, that that long-range, rich, underground communication, the subtle communication at the quantum level, cannot by itself be used to communicate a signal, because that would violate his notion of relativistic causality. But it can be used to profoundly augment any classical link whatsoever. And this has been demonstrated in the laboratory many times now in the phenomenon of quantum teleportation. Quantum teleportation is the ability to destroy an object here, for example, a laser beam, which has a very, very definite number of photons in a very particular quantum state, to destroy it here, measure and destroy, and recreate it in an exact quantum identical state over here. That requires a huge communication of information. That communication of information in the laboratory, that so-called quantum teleportation of an object, or a particle, for example, that huge communication of information is accomplished largely through the unseen quantum link between those correlated objects. A classical communication is also required, but of a very minimal type. A single bit of information over a phone line is enough to unlock a vast quantum mechanical communication link. We could talk about that at length if there were more time, but it is a scientific fact, and an important one, that the correlation between people and objects is real. And one way to influence people with whom we're most closely correlated, our loved ones, members of our own social network, or our own society, or our own nation, or our own nationality, our own cultures. Those individuals with whom we're in closest correlation are most profoundly affected when we ourselves are affected by anything. So when groups of individuals collectively practice this transcendental meditation and advanced techniques and experience this profound state of inner unity, and collectively experience this ground state of consciousness, this unbounded field of consciousness at the basis of mind and matter, that profound influence of calm automatically communicates itself to individuals throughout society, even faster than the speed of light. The influence is instantaneous, and that's supported by the scientific research that shows that the ability to create social coherence and to prevent social violence is virtually instantaneous. And there are other mechanisms at even deeper levels. I'll just list them here. There's not really time to go into them, but these are all valid scientifically known mechanisms of interaction at a distance between objects and individuals. We just talked about the quantum mechanical mechanisms of quantum teleportation. At the quantum field theoretic level, there is the phenomenon of Bose condensation, which after the discovery of Cornell and Ketterle, which won the Nobel Prize recently, even macroscopic objects like rubidium atoms and presumably marbles in people, everything is fundamentally quantum mechanical, and under the right circumstances, everything can experience this phenomenon of Bose condensation, this spontaneous phenomenon of coherent collective functioning. In the domain of human consciousness, we know how to prescribe those conditions which will induce consciousness in several nearby individuals to function coherently, to all simultaneously occupy the same quantum state, to simultaneously experience the field of pure consciousness, the unified field, and that Bose condensation effect provides a natural enhancement of the meditative experience when practiced in groups, leading to an increased statistical tendency of individual members of the meditating group to experience pure consciousness together, and to radiate that pure consciousness forcefully into the environment, just as laser light is a macroscopic quantum coherent phenomena where the individual photons become immensely more powerful by being in synchrony, where the brightness of a laser actually grows according to the square of the number of participating photons. That same phenomenon is activated in this group practice of the transcendental meditation and advanced techniques to produce a very, very concentrated influence of unity, of harmony, of peace in society. And there are even deeper mechanisms unique to the unified quantum field theoretic level. Now let us just end with some very, very important and practical comments that follow from this long theoretical investigation. In the world of peace and conflict resolution, we have just stumbled upon, I shouldn't really say stumbled upon, because really Maharishi Mahesh Yogi himself, due to his profound grounding in the Vedic tradition of knowledge, experientially, and through the Vedic literature itself. Maharishi predicted 25 years ago, perhaps 30 years ago now, that such a societal influence of meditation would soon be felt. And shortly thereafter it was. And as I said, it became a whole industry in the social scientific community. 600 studies now have been published in the world's foremost scientific journals, peer-reviewed scientific journals like the Journal of Conflict Resolution, studies conducted at 200 independent universities and research institutes in 30 countries throughout the world, showing the individual and sociological impact of Maharishi's transcendental meditation on reducing crime and social violence, and of course improving individual health, individual intelligence, brain development, human behavior, and so forth. So this is the most extensively researched phenomenon in the history of social science. Let me repeat this. It's very important. The reduction of social violence, including stopping open warfare in war-torn areas, virtually overnight through assembling a trained group of peace-promoting experts practicing transcendental meditation and advanced techniques. This phenomenon of reducing social violence through group meditation is the most thoroughly researched and rigorously established of any phenomenon in the history of social science. There is, of course, a certain amount of experimental evidence that aspirin reduces headache pain, and we take that for granted. But there is vastly more scientific evidence and vastly more robust that group practice of transcendental meditation and its advanced techniques reduces social violence and stops open warfare. More evidence for that by far than aspirin reduces headache pain, or in fact any phenomenon in the area of social scientific research. So this is a scientific fact of immense practical significance, especially, I believe, for us as national presidents of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, who are a little tired of talking about peace because for 50 years now, Peace-loving members of the scientific community have argued to the Congress, to the parliaments, to the ministers of government, to heads of state, individually and as groups, we have argued for the cessation of war, for the reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons due to the unthinkable consequences of these weapons of mass destruction, and we have not really succeeded. Governments are too gripped in political issues. People are too gripped in the fear of attack and of nationalism, and incoherence and ignorance abounds in the collective consciousness. Our voices have been barely heard. We need, and we have, a powerful tool to elevate collective consciousness so that they can understand better the implications of their choices, and more importantly, to simply diffuse the type of negativity and enmity and stress, political, ethnic, religious tension that's driving conflict and war generation after generation. Create a phase transition in society to one of greater coherence and integration, social coherence and social peace and harmony, to prevent war from breaking out. This is an extremely powerful tool because it can be so easily implemented. We have something as scientists, even a handful of us, can do practically and easily and prevent negativity from arising, rendering our countries secure against attack at a time really where no country can boast that they're secure, that they're invincible. Because even the mightiest nations, the United States perhaps in particular, with its $400 billion defense budget, is quivering, quaking constantly at the almost inevitability of the next terrorist attack. The United States began a war against terror 5-6 years ago, so-called war against terror, trying to exterminate all the potential enemies of the country, exterminate terrorists across the world, as impractical as that may seem. As a result, research shows today that there are 10 times as many potential suicide terrorists against the United States than there were before the U.S. launched its war on terror, showing that war is not a road to peace. Killing always results in the desire for revenge and retaliation upon the family members and members of society until those tensions burst out inevitably into further conflict. So war is not a means to peace, and I think it's very obvious that that is the case. But we've lacked something preventative, something more powerful. And in this innovative, but absolutely scientifically proven and simple approach that targets and neutralizes the cause of war, we can prevent war from breaking out. And it only takes a relative handful of people to produce a transforming influence, a phase transition in the collective consciousness of society as a whole. Approximately the square root of a target population practicing these powerful Vedic meditation programs together in one place is enough to prevent the outbreak of conflict. That, for a country the size of the United States, is just a few thousand. For smaller countries, even less. 8,000, the square root of 1% of the world, can and has, on repeated occasions, produced a global influence of peace and reduction of war. It's that easy. It's very easy to promote national security and invincibility by creating such coherence-creating groups of peace-promoting experts at any school, at any college, at any university, in any large business, even within the military. Create a small wing of the military, a peacekeeping force of the military, to prevent war and spare the other 99% of all soldiers from ever having to face the devastation of war. It is extremely easy and cost-effective, if you do the math, for less than the price of a B-2 bomber, less than what the United States spends on war every day. It would be possible to set up an endowment fund of approximately $1 billion, an endowment fund that would permanently support a group of 8,000 peace-promoting experts to produce harmony and peace on a global scale. So it is very easy and cost-effective due to its power, due to the fact that in reality, this technology of peace is a technology of the unified field, activating, harnessing a level of nature's intelligence that is millions of times more powerful than the nuclear force. able to neutralize and render impotent nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, electronic weapons, and so forth. How do you render these weapons obsolete? How do you neutralize the destructive influence of a nuclear bomb? Prevent the outbreak of war. Prevent the very excuse or opportunity to use such weapons by preventing the very birth of an enemy. Preventative defense on a proven, scientific, rigorous basis. It is easy to stop war and to prevent new wars from arising, and when the institution of war itself is eventually effaced from the earth, weapons of mass destruction will disappear along with it. How practically can we do this? I think the easiest way for many of us as educators, because we, the top scientists of the world, are often associated with universities or have influence in the field of education. Take any one school of our country, any college, any university, or create a new university and introduce into the curriculum, very simply, the study of consciousness and powerful Vedic techniques for the development of consciousness, to develop the total brain. What could be more appropriate in education than a proven means to develop IQ, creativity, learning ability, moral reasoning, etc., on a proven, non-religious, non-sectarian, scientific basis? Education should be for enlightenment. Education should develop the brain holistically. Education should expand human comprehension to be global, for global citizenship, global behavior, replacing narrow-minded nationalism and cramped human comprehension with global citizenship. That's the result of a properly functioning brain. That is an inevitable side effect of global EEG coherence, a side effect of the experience of total natural law, total knowledge, the unified field within, enlivening the unified field, the constitution of the universe within. That not only expands human comprehension, this is one way to understand it. An expanded comprehension, short-sighted, narrow-minded behaviors simply don't arise. Far-sighted thinking and action, with broad comprehension that is of mutual benefit to the whole society. This is the result of expanded comprehension. This is the result of global EEG coherence. This is the result of increased intelligence of the mind, which is the proper fruit of proper education that incorporates the cutting-edge, leading scientific techniques for the development of the brain. It's as simple as that. But as scientists, we can understand this a little more deeply, perhaps, by recognizing that when the totality of natural law, the unified field, the constitution of the universe, the fountainhead of all the laws of nature, the intelligence that upholds the entire universe in perfect order, the intelligence that gave birth to millions of species on Earth and nourishes all the species on Earth in a purely evolutionary and life-supporting way. That intelligence, fully enlivened in individual awareness, then when thoughts and actions arise from that expanded consciousness, those thoughts are suffused or infused with the totality of natural law. So these thoughts are aligned with, in harmony with total natural law. And thinking and action in harmony with total natural law is thinking and action in harmony with that all-nourishing intelligence that sustains the universe. Life-supporting behavior, spontaneous right action, naturally righteous life-supporting action. This is an inevitable side effect of the balanced development of the brain, of enlivening the constitution of the universe and individual awareness, global comprehension. This is easily attained just by introducing the experience of total natural law, the experience of consciousness, into an educational setting. And nothing else need be changed. State-of-the-art knowledge of computer science, business administration, law, all of these practical disciplines can be taught, but not at the expense of the balanced development of the brain. 1 period a day for the study and experience of consciousness is enough, according to research, to transform education everywhere and to bring the fruit of knowledge, the fruit of education, a life spontaneously free of mistakes and the problems born of mistakes, a life spontaneously in harmony with natural law. So, I think the most practical, immediate application of this knowledge to quickly bring strength and security and peace to one's own country is the establishment of a school or a college or a university of peace. As shown here, for example, this is Maharishi University of Management in the United States, which is a highly esteemed doctoral level accredited institution, which really extends from kindergarten to PhD. Absolutely the cutting edge of knowledge, cutting edge of scientific research, but which adds the experience and study of consciousness for the total development of the brain. You can see on the bottom of this chart 2 golden domes, which have been constructed to house meditating groups, men for one, women in another, who gather from all over the community twice a day to practice together this transcendental meditation and advanced techniques, including yogic flying, to generate a profound influence of unity and positivity which can be felt throughout the entire Midwest of the United States, and as these numbers grow, will certainly begin to impact the entire country. Similarly, all over the world, under Maharishi's inspiration, thousands of meditating schools and colleges have been founded. This is an example of an institution of higher education I just visited 2 weeks ago in India, in Bhopal, one of many beautiful new schools where the children are gaining the highest quality education, but most importantly, are trained in the experience and understanding of consciousness for the balanced, holistic development of the brain. I wanted to also show you this, which is what brought me to India and why I'm broadcasting today from New Delhi in India. This is a beautiful world capital of peace that is being built right now in the very geographic center of India, the so-called Brahmistan of India, a very strategic and powerful point in the geography of that country. And here there are 2,000 rooms currently, expanding soon to 16,000 room facility, which will be a university of peace to train 16,000 peace-promoting experts in transcendental meditation, its advanced techniques, and other ancient Vedic practices for the prediction and prevention of problems, known as Grahashanti and Mahayagya and so forth, but especially trained in that experience of total knowledge for the total development of the brain that collectively radiates such a powerful influence that through the mechanisms I've already briefly delineated, broadcast peace and coherence throughout the whole of India. So this is coming up very, very quickly. Indeed, from this one place, such a powerful influence of positivity will be generated, according to past experience and published research. Enough of an influence of peace will be generated that it will really serve to a good degree as a lighthouse of peace for the whole world. So it'll be very soon that the trends of time on Earth will begin to shift in the positive direction globally. Because whenever such large groups have been assembled globally before, and there have been numerous occasions where temporarily groups of about 8,000 yogic flyers have been assembled, there has been a global drop in terrorism and violence, as reported by the Rand Corporation, for example. It is a well-established phenomenon. So these projects are unfolding, but one of the key purposes, I think, of our group, this global union of peace-loving scientists, the top scientists of every country in the world, who have gathered to form this powerful new organization. One of the powerful things we can do is to bring an accelerated and concentrated influence of peace and coherence to our own countries through the establishment of even modest peace-promoting groups within our own countries, which can be done, as I said, in several ways. We could even take an existing school or college and introduce into that college the study and experience of consciousness, the experience of the unified field or constitution of the universe, which is, after all, the cutting edge of modern scientific knowledge. Introduce that cutting-edge knowledge and cutting-edge experience to the students so that they become in themselves radiators of peace, lighthouses of peace, lighthouses of total knowledge, and as a group of students, a lighthouse of peace for the entire society. There is, as you know, a global proliferation of military academies and graduate war colleges dedicated to advancing the science of war. Let there be now one university on Earth, the University of World Peace, dedicated solely to the prevention of war and the promotion of peace, and creating a new profession in the world, not a soldier, but a professional peacemaker. Individuals with the responsibility and ability to actually prevent the outbreak of conflict, rendering a nation truly secure, indeed even invincible. Let me close with one scientific concept of great importance. We know in quantum physics, we're familiar with the phenomenon of the Meissner effect. The Meissner effect is a quantum enhancement of the third law of thermodynamics. The Meissner effect, which we can see here, shows how, in a superconductor, the internal coherence of the constituent atoms results in an impenetrable quality whereby the superconductor cannot be penetrated or disrupted by any external disturbing influence. And as this chart shows on the right, where the superconductor is shown, the superconductor on the right spontaneously expels and repels an external magnetic field. On the left is a normal conductor with incoherent thermal behavior of the constituent atoms. In this incoherent behavior, there is no natural resistance or natural defense against external disruptive influences, and as we can see, an incoherent conductor is easily penetrated by and disrupted by an external magnetic field. This is a universal principle of nature, the principle of invincibility due to strength of internal coherence. When a society is scattered, chaotic, incoherent, it's very easy to disrupt that society, and those societies are always prey to disruption from external influences coming in or internal influences within the country. Great destruction and weakness exists in incoherence. When a society becomes profoundly integrated and strong, which is the result of promoting unity in national consciousness, radiating unity and peace and coherence through even one such coherence-creating group of peace-promoting experts. When that unity becomes lively in collective consciousness, the consciousness becomes spontaneously integrated and strong. And in that coherent state is naturally resists any disruption from inside or external influences. And really, in effect, becomes impervious, becomes secure and invincible within itself. Now, to understand that again in a more prosaic way, in a much more perhaps common sense lay language, when a country becomes peaceful within itself and radiates peace and strength and coherence and is a nourishing influence to all its neighbors, negative enemies just don't arise from those neighbors. Nobody will attack a source of strength and nourishment and coherence. So, by radiating peace, friendliness, and unity from one's borders, enemies simply will not be born. We can, on a scientific way, prevent the very birth of an enemy. That is preventative defense. That's the Vedic principle of defense, actually. Heyam, Dukam, Anagatam, the expression from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. That means avert the danger that has not yet come. Avert the danger before it arises. This is the humane approach to defense, particularly today when offensive defense is failing. When today's offensive weaponry provides no effective defense against weapons of mass destruction in the hands of terrorists, against long-range push-button electronic missile technology, against terrorism in general, against which there's no conventional defense, and against which retaliation holds no preventative value. The only defense in today's age of extreme vulnerability is the preventative defense. And it's so humane and so cost-effective and so scientifically well established that you can actually prevent enemies from arising and even stop warfare in war-torn areas. And where is the research that warfare creates peace? Did World War I prevent World War II? Does any war prevent future wars? No. It leaves the seeds of enmity and dissent and a desire for retaliation, which, if built up unchecked, inevitably erupts as future violence, giving us the endless cycle of war after war that has been with us throughout recent history. We can break that cycle of war leading to war by targeting and diffusing that rising enmity that fuels violent conflict in a scientific way, just by establishing a peace-promoting group in our countries, which can be done even under the logic of better education. Let's give our students the cutting-edge knowledge of physics, and let's give them the cutting-edge knowledge and technologies for the proper balanced development of the brain, which are being used now in advanced countries to improve the results of education and to prevent the deleterious effects of stress, heart disease, stroke, hypertension, ADHD, and this epidemic of stress-related learning disorders that certainly plagues the United States and other so-called developed countries. All of this problems, this epidemic of the emerging generation, can be neutralized just by introducing these proven approaches to bringing balanced brain development and maximum health and creativity and intelligence to our students. So even the logic of educational excellence demands that we incorporate consciousness-based education into the classroom. And this we can all do because all of us have ties to education. Just bring the knowledge to our schools. And I'd be very happy, and many of our experts throughout the world would be extremely happy to collaborate with you in coming up with the ideal program for your country that could most easily and profoundly bring this influence of peace, security, even invincibility on a scientific basis to your countries. Finally, I'll mention that even an agricultural or business endeavor is an easy way to implement a peace-promoting group. Any large business, the employees can grow in health and reduce their absenteeism and improve their worker relationships and productivity, according to extensive research, by introducing the experience of consciousness, transcendental meditation, into the work environment as a developmental tool and as a health benefit of the employees. It's that easy. Or an agricultural project. I'll just mention that the Global Union of Scientists for Peace has representatives in countries throughout the world that are developing remunerative, large-scale, organic agricultural production. For example, in Brazil, where Dr. Luis Alvarez, for example, Jose Luis Alvarez, is bringing into cultivation a huge tract of arable land to produce organic food to feed the world. There is a huge, exploding market for organic food. The food-importing countries of the world, Europe, America, are hungry for more organic food and can consume virtually whatever market, whatever produce we can generate. So in Brazil, for example, or in any country, we can, provided we have access to land, we can easily engage those untapped natural resources. And the population of those countries, in many countries, a quarter or more of the population lives in abject poverty, on less than $1 per day. We can dramatically elevate the quality of life and economic security and comfort and health of these workers, provide them immediately with healthy and comfortable housing, put them to work, engage them, and train them in a remunerative enterprise. We can organize for the overnight distribution via air of these fresh, healthy, organic products, take them to the markets of the world, and produce a revenue stream to elevate the quality of life of our countries. Any of us who are associated with poorer countries especially, and almost every poor country has unused agricultural land, which would be acceptable for this purpose. Bring the economic blessings and relieve the hardship of many people within our countries while generating profits and a revenue stream that will allow us to finance many schools that incorporate this knowledge and experience of total natural law, consciousness-based education, where the experience of the constitution of the universe is lively in the students and they rise to their full potential. So it's very easy to do this. And so the financial foundation for everything we want to do in our own countries comes through several sources. For one thing, through the International Office of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, there are modest resources available for specific projects in your countries. Even better, of course, for larger financial support, we can initiate peaceful initiatives in our own countries, like educational projects, colleges and schools, which if they're run properly, are remunerative and profit-generating and self-sustaining. That's the way we can self-sustain a coherence-creating group of peace-promoting experts in our country, or large-scale Vedic organic agricultural projects to really bring abundant wealth and health to the people of your country and to the people of the world, while financing all of our peace-promoting activities in our country, really giving us a very powerful basis of financial support to really transform the world in a practical way. And we would be extremely happy to share information with you and among all of you about these very successful peace initiatives that are taking place already today in many countries, and with a little bit of effort and a little skill can be easily implemented anywhere to really overnight. It sounds amazing, but it is a scientific fact to say, overnight, the moment we train a group of peace-promoting experts in these powerful technologies of meditation, because there are many methods of meditation, but very few have the research to show that they really take the mind straight away to this experience of unbounded awareness without years and years of practice, but straight away. In the first meditations, expand human awareness to become unbounded and experience this total knowledge, the unified field within. It's that experience, not concentration, not contemplation, not visualization, just that unique experience, which is a fourth state of human consciousness, that engages and harnesses the unified field, creating these ripples that add together as tidal waves of unity and peace for our societies. With that training, which can begin at age 10, a child can easily master this technique because it is so natural and so naturally powerful. Overnight, virtually, we can create this influence of peace for the country while bringing maximum blessings and total brain development to the students themselves. So I'd like to conclude this first Congress of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace by reflecting that we have discussed today in some detail this vital phenomenon, this crucial discovery of preventative defense, which is an innovative, extensively scientifically proven approach to preventing war and social violence, even terrorism and crime. It neutralizes the enmity in a potential adversary so that enemies simply are not born. And this on a scientific, repeatable, demonstrable basis. We discussed briefly the theoretical foundations of these powerful developmental technologies of consciousness and technologies for social transformation on the basis of the cutting-edge knowledge of modern science, the discovery of the unified field at the foundation of the universe, this field of intelligence at the basis of mind and matter, and identifying that with the simplest, most expanded state of human consciousness, the ground state of human awareness, is the direct experience of this unified field. And on that basis, we talked about field theoretic mechanisms for the spreading of social coherence, a phenomenon, the prevention of war and promotion of peace through group meditation, that has been more rigorously established and extensively verified than any other phenomenon ever in the history of social science. This on the basis of 600 published scientific studies in the world's foremost scientific journals, conducted at over 200 independent universities and research institutes in 30 countries throughout the world. And we discussed very briefly the practical implementation of this new technology of peace, this new approach to national security and invincibility, including the funding of these projects and the establishment of schools and colleges and universities of peace, including transforming an existing college into a peace factory simply by introducing the knowledge and experience of consciousness into the educational curriculum. And we've also talked briefly about model projects, including, for example, businesses and agricultural development projects to eliminate poverty from our countries while promoting peace and invincibility. We will be in close contact with you, and hopefully you with us, over these next days to discuss your potential role in any of these peace-promoting projects and to discuss with you the most viable strategies of implementation that are most practical for the circumstances of your country. I would like to thank you very much for assembling to your computers and telephones for this first cyber conference of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, broadcast live from the Sheraton Moria Hotel in New Delhi via global internet broadcast. And I will again quickly edit and distribute to you a DVD with superior graphic resolution for all of you by mail, together with a transcript of this talk and relevant slides on DVD format for you to distribute as you wish to other leading scientists and lovers of peace in your countries, to policy members, to members of government, to experts in the field of education, to education ministry, to agricultural ministry, all those who are in a position at the snap of a finger to implement such a coherence-creating group to reduce crime markedly and to increase strength and security, affluence, creativity, quality of life, financial self-sufficiency, and profound peace within your countries. The research is comprehensive in the scope of the impact of strength and coherence and peace to society just through these fundamental experience of pure consciousness, the unified field, and enlivening that unity in the individual physiology and in the collective physiology of the entire country. All for less than the cost of a single modern fighter bomber, one could endow a university of peace forever. That contrasts the cost-effectiveness of preventative defense with this grossly expensive offensive means of defense that has held sway, that has been predominant for so many generations. Now is the time to render such offensive means of defense forever obsolete, put an end and neutralize such offensive weapons, including weapons of mass destruction, by putting an end to the legacy of war itself and preventing the very birth of enemies, expanding narrow-minded nationalism, which abounds everywhere, to become expanded comprehension and global citizenship, and really create a global unity, a global country of world peace, not to erase the beautiful differences of every individual culture, but to allow every culture of the world to blossom in its integrity, in richness, in individuality, but in the context of a unity, a fundamental unity that pervades the world. Again, I thank you very much for your participation. I look forward to working very closely with you and to getting you information that would give you the ammunition to share this really crucially important scientific knowledge to all the decision makers in your countries, using the considerable influence you each have in the scientific and academic and policy worlds of your countries to really quickly bless your countries with a proven approach to peace, national security, and invincibility. Again, thank you for your participation. Again, I'm John Hagelin, the International Director of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, and also the President of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace for the United States. I look forward to being in touch with you, and thank you for your participation.